A Cricketing View, an irregular podcast about cricket and other things. Hello, and welcome to another episode of my podcast. It's called A Cricketing View. This is an episode taking place after several months, mostly because I think nothing much happened in cricket over the last few months. And then suddenly, England decided to basically overthrow Test cricket. So I thought this was something worth discussing. To talk about Bazball, I've invited Test Match Specials Daniel Norcross, who's sort of like the Joe Root of Test Match Special at this point. So welcome, Daniel.
Well, that is a fantastic introduction. It has been, as you said, or implied at any rate in your introduction, a very, how can I say, stimulating and an extraordinary start to England's season. I mean, to put this into context, I think from an England point of view, and I don't mean this as a fan, I mean as an observer of English cricket.
Yeah.
At the start of the season, many of my colleagues, many of the people in the press box that we've talked to a lot, I'm not going to name any particular names, but lots of people began the season in June, on June the 2nd at Lord's, with a very genuine expectation that England could lose all the 7 test matches that they'd play this summer. And not because, they're an epically rubbish team, but because New Zealand felt like a well-drilled unit that knew what they were doing. They were world test champions, after all. India,
they won in England last year.
Correct, exactly. And dominantly, absolutely dominantly.
Yeah.
They could have won both games, but the pitch at Lord's was slow and low, and but they were by far the better team. And India thoroughly outplayed England last year, with the exception of the Headingley Test match, which all hinged actually on 2 collapses, really. But India were man for man, a much better side. They're much more dynamic. They seemed to have an idea of what it was that they wanted to do. And England then played South Africa in 3 test matches, and their bowling attack, which I know you're particularly keen on bowling attacks, and you're right to be, looked man for man like a much better bowling attack than England's. When you add on top of that they'd emerged from a pretty gloomy winter, a very limp display in Australia, a pretty limp display really in the West Indies. And I know you don't care for batting frailties, but there is no doubt that some of the players at the top of their order did look, people like Zach Crawley, Rory Burns, and trying to find the right openers, Hasib Hamid and Johnny Bairstow, I would say, didn't necessarily feel like they were adapting to the superiority of bowlers in the modern era. So it felt an entire reasonable possibility that England would lose 7 out of 7 test matches. And by, when was it? Was it the 6th of July? Something like that? 7th of July. They'd won 4, but they'd not just won 4. They'd won 4 from being behind at various stages, and quite significantly behind in all 4 of them. Yeah. Probably the one they were most often in front was the Lord's Test match. But the other 3, they really shouldn't. You wouldn't have thought, cricketing logic didn't make sense that they would be able to win those matches. But they didn't just win them, they kind of won them at a canter. And so you're then left scratching your head wondering what you've just seen. Is it a revolution? Are there other factors involved? And what I'm going to talk about with you today is going to be both those things. But I do want to stress that there have been unique factors in the 2022 season, because we need to frame what we're watching. I have never seen a congruence of balls and pitches and weather, for that matter, that have made chasing so desirable. I've never seen balls as bad as the ones that bowlers are currently bowling with, that they offer nothing after 30 overs. I mean, really nothing.
And they go out of shape.
And they go out of shape, Kartikeya, after 1 hit. I mean, Rishabh Pant smashed a replacement ball. And this isn't just, are they really out of shape? I promise you, we saw a close-up on the TV, and one side of the ball was still like what half a sphere should look like, and the other side of the ball looked like it had just been flattened. It was ridiculous.
Well, in any case, it's not like it's a matter of opinion, right? They have that jig, and there's a rule, and if it doesn't satisfy that, then it's out of shape. That's all there is to it. It's not a matter of opinion.
That's right.
So
that's absolutely correct. But but I guess what we're getting also is a bit of anecdotal evidence thrown in, because we were fortunate enough to stay with the team in the team hotel in Headingley, which was a very revealing 5 days. But if you spoke to the bowlers, and indeed the batters, but particularly the bowlers, about their experiences this summer, and I do a regular podcast with Stephen Finn, and he's obviously bowling in county championship cricket with these balls every week, and the message is the same every time. It's that it's kind of slightly magical and mystical, because it is always basically after 30 overs. They can't get them to reverse. They become very soft. They bang into these pitches, which have been, I think, especially well prepared this summer as kind of a retort from ground staff to the notion that English pitches are creating 75 mile per hour dibbly dobblers who can't adapt to foreign conditions. And so they said, well, if you want a road, we'll give you a road. And if you take a road and you put a soft ball on it, how do you take a wicket? And I present to you as Exhibit 1, Daryl Mitchell and Tom Blundell, who are two very fine and very noble and capable batters in world cricket.
Yeah.
But they came into the series with averages in the, Blundell averaged about 41, I think, and Mitchell about 33, a small sample size in Mitchell's case, I grant you. But Mitchell and Blundell tended to come together around about, I mean, you can double check, 30, 40 overs. Yeah. If they came together a little bit earlier, what they did was be scoreless for 10 overs until the ball was 30, 40 overs old. And then you couldn't get rid of them. You couldn't get them out, And these are the same bowlers that had reduced New Zealand to sort of 39 for 6 with the new ball. And frankly, the numbers just stack up. Andy Zaltzman talked us through this, that the first 30 overs, the wickets are going at an average of, I think, 27 to 28, which is a little bit lower than the 5-year average. And from overs 31 to 80, if you take out one pretty poor New Zealand display in the third innings, which you can do, because with my eyes I can tell you it wasn't the ball getting them out, it was bad shot selection. They're averaging about 64.
Yeah.
So, you have to bear that in mind when you bear in mind the success of England's approach, I think.
Mine goes back to something you were saying before we started recording this, which is that we don't have time to reflect on a test match anymore, and that they come and go so fast that there isn't time to build up a story around them. And I wonder whether Bazball will just come and go just like everything else, because just today a guy named Pollock made a century in the county championship in 66 balls, and he's an opener. And at any rate, it's not a wicket plot hatched by Rob Key,
No, it's definitely not that. I mean, I'm not quite sure what it is. To start with, let's go right back to what Bazball is. Bazball, I believe, was first coined by Andrew Miller of Cricinfo.
Yes. Yeah.
And Brendan McCullum doesn't like it.
No.
And he thinks it's nonsensical. And I kind of know why, because I don't think there is a plot. I don't think Brendan McCullum got them together and said, okay, lads, what you're going to do is go hard and keep going hard.
Yeah.
I don't think it's as simple as that. Although watching the way Ben Stokes has batted, you'd be forgiven for thinking that was what was going on. And indeed, looking at the way, I think the most instructive thing to look at in the whole analysis of the last 4 test matches is how England approached conceding 553, was it, at Trent Bridge?
Yeah.
So that pitch was very similar, actually, to a lot of the one-day pitches on which England had set previous world records at 480 odd against Pakistan, wasn't it? Australia. They racked up loads on it. So it was a good pitch and short boundaries and a very fast outfield and perfectly decent weather. But what they did was they put New Zealand into bat. They didn't say to themselves, oh, the batting conditions are great, let's get on the front foot by batting. They said, if we're going to pick up early wickets, we've got a better chance of doing it when the pitch is at its newest and freshest. And if we concede 553, then what we've got to do is get as close to 553 as quickly as possible, so there's still time enough left in the game to win.
Yeah.
Now, that is a radically different approach from England because, and I think probably for any team, actually, any side that is faced with such a mammoth first innings total is going to try and get close, but they're not going to worry about taking their time.
No.
They're going to take their time because then that makes it harder for the side who batted first to take 20 wickets.
But that's the bet there is that the wicket won't break in the fourth innings. And that bet has come off for England 4 times out of 4. If the wicket breaks, they're in trouble, right? I mean, and in most parts of the world, wickets do break. But in England, funnily enough, they break up less than in other parts of the world.
Well, there's a good reason for that. And again, it's quite specific to, if you were here, you would understand why, because we had quite a dry summer so far, a really dry summer, but it's been very cold until very recently, until the last couple of weeks. And so with pitches that have been created on these grounds, which have exceptionally good drainage, they have been watered and watered and watered and watered, and they've left a little bit more grass on. All of them had a little thatch of grass on. The last game on which they scored 370 odd at Edgbaston had grass. So it never really felt like it was going to break up because this wasn't sun beating down at it. It was a sort of 20-degree days mostly. It was quite chilly actually on occasion. So if you've watered the pitches extensively beforehand and then you haven't got sun beating down it and you've got grass holding it together, what you end up getting is a kind of better and better surface. And we've seen that in all these pitches. That I remember on commentary, we were discussing the contrast between the way England chased down 270 something to beat New Zealand in the first test at Lord's. And they did it in like 2 overs less, I think, than they were offered the previous year. I promise you, they were completely different pitches. I mean, England should have tried harder in 2021 to win that game because it wasn't a World Test Championship game. Just show a bit of ambition. But it would have been devilishly difficult to get those runs. It was a slow, low wicket, whereas this Lord's pitch, the carry was better. And then the balls became completely impotent. And you'll notice that in each of these chases, England has not been subjected to a second new ball. No. And that is absolutely vital. And I think what's happened is there's been a bit of a rope-a-dope going on, reference to the Ali, what's his name, fine, George Foreman, that they're playing cricket with a bit of knowledge that the pitches are going to be fine and the ball's a bit rubbish because they played with them in the county championship and they know it all. And the opposition have come in going, well, we're quite a long way ahead. Look at the third innings failures of India, especially. I mean, they really didn't capitalise on the strong position. New Zealand did it twice. They didn't capitalise on a strong position, partly because I think they felt they would kind of had enough already. And India would have thought 378, well, we'll get a second new ball at least. If we take 4 or 5 wickets with the first new ball, we'll wrap up the rest with the second. Yeah. That's where England's approach has been clever and to the situation. I'll give them that. I'm not sure, as you say, that it's going to be a sustainable approach in different circumstances. But I think they might. I mean, it might be, say, somewhere like Adelaide, that sort of thing.
To the extent that I can see the logic behind the way they're playing, it seems to be that if the ball isn't doing very much, then perhaps the risk associated with going after a fuller length and going after a shorter length is overestimated in Test cricket. And if you have batsmen in form, then it's a good bet for them to go after those lengths. And so therefore you narrow the lengths available to the bowler to keep the runs down. And that makes it impossible for the bowler to shut the game down, basically. Because
I think, I think there's a lot of truth in that. And you can see actually that England's batters would concur with you, because you look at the way Root, not so much Bairstow. Bairstow doesn't tend to come at you. He tends to play the length that there is, but he gives you quite a small margin. But Root and Lees did this incredibly surprisingly to us, who had only seen him a little bit in county cricket and then watched the three and a half Test matches he played against the West Indies in the first innings at Lords.
Yeah.
He stayed rooted to the spot, pushing at the ball, slightly groping at it, feeling it, just trying to bat time. But actually, they come down the wicket at you now, and they do it. I wouldn't say by numbers. I mean, I'm not going to put words in their head, but it sometimes looks a bit like it, you know. So Stokes will suddenly just come walking at you. And this is to mess with the bowler's length for that very reason, I think, that on these kind of pitches, that then makes the bowler think about, you know, banging it in shorter, or at which point you get absolutely pumped. Because if you bowl short with these balls on these pitches and those boundaries and those outfields, you're on a hiding to nothing. You know, you just can't do it. Yeah. Unless you've got a very, very specific plan. And it's kind of ironic, actually, that England go to the short ball when they're in the field. You'll notice it from around about the 50th over, when they've decided that the ball will give them nothing. So they then take a 6-3 field and wanging it and wanging it and wanging it in. And I mean, it hasn't really worked very often, but
no, because I think it hasn't worked because there aren't that many bowlers trying it. I think Ben Stokes is particularly good at trying it. I mean, in the sense that I think he's sort of persistent with it. He keeps trying it. And he's constantly, it seems to me, trying to get the batsman to play with the timing off. You know, he's constantly trying to hit the wicket hard. He's constantly trying to hit the bat higher up than, you know, the batsman wants, or, you know, get the bouncer to climb a little higher, or bowl cross seam, or I mean, I'm sure he damages the ball, and in another season, I think James Anderson might not enjoy bowling with him that much. But in this season, it's especially, I think, in the third innings against India, I think Ben Stokes was really, I mean, it was really made for his kind of attacking bowling, you know, because Ben Stokes comes off as being a fast bowler who's so reasonably quick, but he doesn't really have a natural length. He hits the pitch, and he can hit the pitch at several different lengths, but his game is not steady. His bowling is not like, I'm going to bowl steady, hold the end up. He's sort of the anti-de Grandhomme in pretty much every sense. You know?
Yes, he is. He is. Yeah. I think that's absolutely right. But it was interesting that it was really only against. I mean, he's picked up the odd wicket actually here and there. His bowling has been more effective this summer than it has for quite a while. But it was a specific circumstances, I think, at Birmingham against a specific team who didn't quite understand the rules of engagement. You know, I come back to that a little bit. That they had a fantastic opportunity. They were ahead in the game. Through every point of it after the Punt and Jadeja partnership.
Yeah.
Up until, well, I mean, you would argue at 109 for 3, they were ahead of the game as well when England lost their third wicket in the chase.
Yeah.
But what they did was they didn't quite understand that what they needed. And Pujara's wicket was absolutely key.
Yeah.
And he got out to a ball that was great. When you were there, it felt like everybody got everything wrong there. Like Broad didn't quite release it the way he wanted to release it.
Yeah.
Pujara was a bit surprised by the fact that he was getting a short, filthy ball outside the off stump, and against character type decided to cut, which isn't necessarily what you'd expect. The ball was a bit softer, so it stayed stuck in the pitch because Broad hadn't quite got his rhythm right with the ball. And it was a kind of horrible looking wicket. It was very much a sort of you've seen,
like a long hop.
But it was so crucial because what that did was get rid of the one guy who really could have challenged Bazball, for want of a better word, because he would simply have been willing to camp in there and bat till beyond tea.
Yeah, and I think he would have kept. I think he would have kept the other players in line as well. You know,
yes, absolutely.
This maniacal swinging would not have happened.
That's right. And it was maniacal, really. And I couldn't work out from an Indian point of view whether this was because they thought they'd already got enough, so they might as well just swing and add another 20 or 30, which is what it felt like, or if none of them trusted their technique. But I mean, it was one of the maddest games, because the point at which Stuart Broad bowled that over that went for 35.
Yeah.
I mean, I was spitting feathers, again, not from an England fan point of view, at just what looked like astounding lack of cricketing intelligence.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, why was he bowling that? Having watched all these matches this season, you knew that the new ball was crucial.
Yeah.
And you get Bumrah out with 3 slips and a gully with the new ball. Why are you not taking a new ball, or if you get a new ball, banging it in halfway down, which is absolutely no use to man of East? So it was chaotic, Kartikeya. That's the thing. And that's why it was so difficult in the moment to describe to listeners what was going on, because your visceral reaction from watching cricket for 47 years is this is ridiculous. This is absolute madness, and everybody's got this wrong. And yet, of course, what it was one of the most entertaining Test matches you've ever seen in your life. So, you know, does that make me a bore? Maybe it does a bit, because I was mostly flummoxed.
Yeah, I mean, their sort of their estimation of risks is, I suppose it's what you'd call eccentric. You know.
Yes. Well, you remember the phrase. You'll be aware of this from the report. At Trent Bridge, when England was set 299, seems piffling now.
Yeah.
But they'd lost. That's right, and they'd lost some early wickets.
Yeah.
And Stokes said to Bairstow, "I don't want to see you hit the ball on the ground.
Yeah.
I want you to hit the stand."
Yeah.
Now, of course, this is lunacy, because there was time. Yeah. There was time, but he I think that actually is what, for want of a better word, Bazball is about. It's about looking at the situation and deciding to attack your startled opponent, and figuring that if it comes off, you'll win. If it doesn't come off, you'll lose. If you adopted the approach that you've always adopted, you'll lose because people don't get to 299 in third innings chases very often. In England, it's rare. So I think they were just a bit smarter about reading the actual match situation. They were smarter than us, the pundits, and they were smarter than their opponents.
And I think they were in just magnificent form.
Yeah, there's 2 players at the moment batting. I mean,
Bairstow and Root
on another planet.
They've been very different, 2 very different players. You know, and they've also, I mean, poor Bairstow, you know, for the last 3 years, every time he's missed the ball, it's clipped the bail or it's clipped the edge, and you know, or it's been done some horrible thing like, you know, take the inside edge and hit the pad and then trickle onto leg stump or something like that. And now, you know, he swings, and if it seems, it goes clean past the pad and the stumps, and if it doesn't seem, it hits the middle of his bat and it flies over mid-off for 4. You know,
you're absolutely. I mean, you're absolutely right.
Good luck to him. I say, you know, that guy has been through so much difficulty. You know, good for him. You know,
and you're right. There is an element of luck. And actually, if you look at the first Test match, it's a very salutary lesson in fortune and fate.
Well, he failed twice, didn't he? In that way.
Yes. Well, not only that, he was bowled twice.
Yeah.
And he was then bowled twice in a Test match at Lords for the 4th time.
Yeah.
No other player in the history of Test cricket has been bowled twice in a Test match at Lords more than once. Now, that's quite extraordinary. And his average against the straight ball from quick bowlers was in single figures at the start of this season. Yeah. So here's another example of good fortune for you. Yeah. Trent bowled a spell that was of breathtaking genius. Was it the second Test match when he picked up 3 quick wickets at the top? He bowled Ollie Pope. He got Lees out, and he got Crawley, and he was swinging it. And according to CricViz database, it was the most challenging opening spell of bowling in Test cricket in their entire database. And this is done on the basis of their expected wickets. And I know all of this is open to question, but it is a metric that they use, and so.
But it's a systematic measurement, so it's
exactly
probably doing better than you and me.
Correct. Bairstow came in, I think, in something like the 8th over when Bolt was just over halfway through this extraordinary spell. And he faced an over from Bolt. And weirdly, the over he received from Bolt, I think every ball was missing the stumps.
Yeah.
And it was so strange because Bolt had bowled this mesmerizing spell attacking the stumps. And when the one guy who's come in, who had hitherto got an average in single figures against the fast straight ball, that the guy who had been aiming at the stumps suddenly didn't. And it was almost as if there was a force field around Johnny Bairstow, And that is not in any way to belittle the astounding feats of the remarkable batsmanship, but it was a bit weird. It was a bit like, and of course, I don't believe in gobbledygook, so I don't believe in forces being aligned. I don't believe in fate and karma, but I think I probably believe in luck, and that everything worked for him. But you've then got to grab that, haven't you, and go berserk and and score hundreds. I mean, what was his 150? Was it England's fastest 150? It was England's second fastest century of all time.
Is that so? Trent Bridge. I mean, I would be surprised. I mean, you'd think both of them did something quicker.
Both of them did 86 balls and 87 balls in 1981, and they were seen as remarkable. I wore out the videotape watching those at Headingley and Old Trafford. Bairstow was one ball slower than Jessop's famous 72-ball 100 in 1902, which is incredible, isn't it? I mean, it's... But then again, Jasprit Bumrah hit 29 runs in an over. I'm not sure he'd scored 29 runs in Test cricket when he came over to England last year. I don't think that's true. I think he got about 40, but you know what I mean. So in 6 balls, he'd scored well over half the runs he'd gotten in the first 3 years of his career.
Yeah.
So I mean, what we're witnessing all through this is a sort of obviously a more aggressive approach. And I guess what interests me is, how do teams react to an aggressive approach? You see, I fundamentally believe, as I said to you earlier, that if Pujara had played Pujara ball and not got caught at backward point, that would have been the way ultimately to stifle the way England play. Because England bowls so many overs by comparison. In the Trent Bridge test, they bowled 222 overs, I think it was, to score, and New Zealand bowled 122 to score the same number of runs. England were going at 5.5 and over, New Zealand at 2.97. So actually, if you can keep England in the field, that old verity, when they come out to bat, they won't detain you for very long. You can get back to batting again.
Yeah.
So I would grind and grind and grind if I was an opponent. But then, is that just me looking through the eyes of old cricket?
I'd like to see how well it survives when, then someone is not in red hot form the way Bairstow is. At some point, when he misses, he's going to get out. For now, it's wonderful. I think it's sensational, Here's a question for you. In Test history, there have been 48 scores of over 200 in the 4th innings that were made at more than 4 runs and over. In which sort of 5-year period would you say have there been the most of those 48?
Well, there have been a lot in the last 4 weeks, but it's a very good question. So chases of more than 50 overs, did you say?
No, just 200 runs.
Just 200 runs.
Yeah.
I would think the early 1900s would have seen quite a few of those, because that was quite an aggressive time. Australia had a very aggressive side with Warwick Armstrong, Victor Trumper, Clem Hill. I would have thought that might have been quite a fruitful time. Certainly not the 50s and 60s, I wouldn't have said, because the average score rate was very low.
2001 to 2006, there were 14 4th innings made at more than 4 and over in that period. The wickets were really good for batting. Fast bowling stocks were thin, and generally scoring rates overall were sort of closer to 3.5 than 3. which
Well,
is
didn't
what
Australia up their average run rate from 2.9 in their sort of dominant 90s period
happened.
to sort of 3.8 or something
No,
around
well,
that time?
a little less than that, but yeah, but they're just one team. There's lots of other teams doing this
Yes,
too. I mean, New Zealand,
I
for
see.
instance, got to 274 in less than 60 overs at Brisbane against Australia in that one series where uh,
Yeah,
I think the match was rain interrupted, and Steve Waugh then set up like a sporting declaration or something. And of course, this was a big deal. And then I think Chris Cairns nearly sort of got New Zealand. They were still 60 or 70 away, but
yeah, that would
two.
make sense. I think
Yeah,
England, but I
yeah,
think England have had 3 of the 7 fastest innings of 50 overs plus
yeah.
in
Oh,
this summer.
definitely. Yeah,
I mean, which
yeah,
is absurd. But that's sort of why I guess why I began by being a bit of a miserabilist by trying to set up the exact context on which they're playing. The
yeah,
ball is a vital component in that. The quality of India's bowlers is high. So when you see them struggling to do anything with the ball, then trust me that sort of combination of pitch and ball is fearful. And we as commentators knew exactly. We were looking at scoreboard the whole time. Once that ball got over 30 overs old, just
yeah,
thinking we are now in massively diminishing returns. And I know it's true of all cricket. I know that new ball's important, but there's no reverse. There was no zip. The ball was so soft that it wasn't just that it was scuffy. It was useless.
yeah. To be fair to the Indian bowlers, I think England were lucky to get to 280 in the first innings.
Yeah,
Ironically, I think India outplayed England in the first innings of that Test match, and then got absolutely hammered in the second innings of the Test match.
yeah. I
So
think that's a very fair assessment. Yeah, it's just like those first innings took quite a while. I mean, that said, India played much closer to England than to New Zealand because actually, I think the total number of runs scored by each team at Headingley and at Trent Bridge, Headingley, yes, sorry, at Edgbaston and at Trent Bridge, were very similar. So if you look at the way we already said, New Zealand took 100 more overs to score the same number of runs as England.
yeah,
In the Birmingham Test, it was a very, very similar number of total runs, 680 odd. It was something like that. And India actually got there in about 58 overs fewer than New Zealand. It's about 167.
yeah.
England got the same number of runs pretty much in almost exactly the same number of overs, around 122, 123.
Yeah.
So there was almost like a kind of repeatable tempo to it, which is what, and again, I stress, it's a very small data sample size. But if you think that something is really unusual and a one-off,
Yeah.
Which is what it felt like at Trent Bridge,
Yeah.
and then you get almost the same number of runs scored in almost exactly the same number of overs, then you start thinking, is this actually a tempo of design? Now, I don't know. It could be that the match circumstances, the pitch conditions, the outfields and everything just lent themselves to playing in the same way. It could have been a muscle memory from having done it before. So we go, well, that worked. But they did it quite differently. The Edgbaston chase was mostly along the ground. I mean, there were some moments of madness, like Root doing the reverse flick. But I promise you that we arrived at the ground on the 5th day with India needing 7 wickets and England needing 119 runs. And all cricketing logic said, well, the batters have got to start all over again.
Yeah.
A wicket or two. England's got an incredibly long tail with Potts, Leach, Broad, and Anderson. I mean, it's not a productive one. The Indian and New Zealand tails are flaky. They don't last for any length of time, but they garner 60 or 70 runs through wildness and mayhem and chaos.
Yeah.
So it felt like there ought to have been pressure on it, but Prakash Wakankar just was, along with Andy Zoltzman, the Indian commentator, and Andy Zoltzman, the statistician on TMS, and in fact Simon Mann, were all of an opinion that this was just going to be a cakewalk. And I think that's because of what we'd seen in the weeks before, and what we'd seen with our eyes was the interaction between bowler, pitch, and batter, and with a ball of a certain amount of age. So there was a little bit of thatness to it as well. And we'd seen that the ball's doing next to nothing. But none of the normal cricketing shibboleths, the wicket in the first half an hour, a couple of quick ones, seemed to sort of enter a lot of pundits' heads by this stage. They would just thought there was an inevitability to what we're watching. And yet England then chased down that 119 runs in, what was it? 18 overs or something stupid. I mean, it was utterly ridiculous, playing unusual shots. So this is what I come back to briefly, their approach against the 5-5-3, whatever it was that New Zealand got at Trent Bridge.
Yeah.
There was a point when Root was playing one-day shots, when England was still 300 behind.
Yeah.
Now, that is not what you're doing, unless what you're trying to do is stay in the game. The fourth innings chases are a bit less interesting in a way than how England have batted in their first innings, the second innings of the match each time. And
I remember Peterson batting like that back in the day.
Yes, exactly. I mean, exactly. It's not a completely new thing.
Peterson would sort of flick a ball from the fourth or fifth stump outside off stump, between mid-on and mid-wicket every now and then off a good length. I mean, he could do it. He was good enough to do it, but still,
he was brilliant at it. But what he actually, I think, a close study of Peterson's innings, I'd be interested to see it from the feel of them, from the memory of them.
Yeah,
they didn't. He went through the gears, as they say. Yeah. So the first 50 was relatively even paced. Strike rate of 50, but sometimes less. And then he would. And a great example would be the innings against South Africa in 2012. Would that be? I guess, which was an extraordinary innings against Spain with James Taylor at the other end. But what was noticeable here was that there was no real going through the gears. There was, each ball was played at either fifth gear or first gear.
Yeah.
It was either stopped or whacked. And there was a peculiar clarity to that, with the exception being Root, who just is in very good form and on very good pitches against a spongy ball, is able to play late because he can. He's great at playing late, so he can manipulate. But then he would suddenly unfurl a ridiculous move across his stumps and do a reverse flick, sort of be more like Rishabh Pant, for example. And that's when he started to wonder. And I promise you, talking to the players, I won't name them specifically, but one of them who's played and been around for a while, I said, come on, this is just voodoo, isn't it? I mean, you've seen everything in cricket. You've been around for a long, long time. Nothing's just been invented before your eyes. And he said, honestly, Daniel, I'm having more fun now playing than I ever have. It's just fantastic. Johnny Bairstow, who's a notoriously
prickly,
prickly. He's a prickly interviewee, and because he has a perfectly understandable suspicion of the media, and because he's had an up and down career, he's had 2016 was a great year for him when he broke the record for the most number of runs scored by a keeper and took the most number of catches. And then he's had this last period, but in between times he's averaged below 30. So people have obviously got after him, and when they've seen him being bowled a lot, they've got after him. And so he's not naturally predisposed to thinking well of the media, because they tend to point those things out, which is perfectly understandable. But he has been he has had a sunny disposition. He has been a joy for people to talk to. Everybody around the team has been a joy for people to talk to. The management have been approachable. The players have been very visible, even in the team hotel. They didn't hide away in the executive lounge or anything. They were sort of there. They would pop in, say hello, go to bed. It's like there's a bizarre sense of bonhomie and happiness. And I think if you're going to put Bazball down to anything, it is that England have spent the last 2 years with the biggest commitment to fixtures of any country in the world.
Yeah.
part of that, I think, might be because they've spent an enormous amount of money, the ECB, on launching a tournament and used up quite a lot of reserves. And it's essential that they fulfill fixtures for broadcasting rights. And the result of that has been, and look, those fixtures are all in the calendar.
Yeah.
But when you're playing in COVID land and you're the only country doing that, Australia didn't do that. Australia didn't play any cricket, did they?
Yeah.
When England's players are doing that and they're playing IPL, which also has to exist and had to exist in COVID land, and a lot of their prominent players are doing that.
Again, for the same reasons.
Yes, exactly.
Because they've
exactly
signed these huge contracts and they have to fulfill them.
Correct. And if you think back to the India-England series.
Yeah.
When England won the first test at Chennai.
Yeah.
What did they do? They sent various players home for a rest. Now, that was very worthy, and it was exactly, understandably, the right thing to do. But if you're a gnarled, grizzled old professional and you've just won the first test against India, you're thinking, can we please just make sure we've got our best team out right now? Now, Johnny Bairstow had just got a good score against Sri Lanka, and then they sent him home for 2 weeks and then to come back out again. And the reasoning behind it was completely understandable. There was a pandemic on. No one knew what the right thing to do was. People were concerned about players' mental health. And the result of that is that it may have been the right decision for players' mental health. It might not. But it was obviously not the right decision for a team, a sports team, because a sports team wants a degree of continuity. It wants to have a plan. It wants to have a togetherness. It doesn't want to have people coming in and out, round about. And while they were out touring and playing the games that they were playing in the IPL and whatnot, they were in hotels seeing each other and nobody else. If you go on tour, as I did in 2017-18, for example, in Australia, you see the players in the evening, some of them, just out and about. They're not going wild and lashing it up, but you go out for something to eat. They go and sit by a dockside, just decompress. It's absolutely the most normal thing in the world. During COVID, they could do none of that. So what you've got, I think, is this, like in 12 Angry Men, how the walls close in that film with Henry Fonda, about the 12 jurors, and the sort of the great cinematic trick is that you don't realize it, but as you're watching, the actual set is gradually getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So you feel the claustrophobia of their experience. And to be honest, I think we all did feel that. The England team had become joyless. It had become fulfillment of fixture. It had become just getting through it and surviving it. And that's not how you win games cricket. Whereas Brendan McCullum has come in at a time when all those restrictions have gone, and players are now able to go out and do what they want. And he's saying to them, don't die wondering. I think there's Brendan's relatively famous for pointing out that the first part of his career, he didn't really play the way he played in the latter part of his career. And in the latter part of his career, he doesn't regret that he didn't play like that in the full part of his career, but it meant that when he retired, he was comfortable that he had actually expressed himself in the way that he wanted to. And he's really, I think, reminding a lot of quite old and experienced cricketers, Jimmy Anderson, Stuart Broad, Root, Stokes, Bairstow. These are very, very experienced cricketers. You don't want to be retired wondering what you might have done. And then that filters into someone like Alex Lees, because I think the single most instructive thing to understand a Bazball is if you compare Lees' first innings, in the first innings at Lords and the second innings at Lords. And the numbers will tell you very little. He got 20, I think, in the second innings at Lords. But I'd never seen him in an England shirt actually go after one that's a little bit wider, a little bit fuller. There's a small element of risk, but not too much, and just cover drive it before, which is how he got into the England team in the first place, by having gone through the age group levels, by hitting those balls a million times. But when he played for England in the first 3 tests against West Indies and the first innings against New Zealand, it actually looked like someone trying to prove that he could stay in. I belong here, I can stay in.
How much of Bazball is really Stokesball?
So that's a really good question. That's a really good question. I mean, a bit like how Morgan and Bayliss really transformed the one-day team, and the way they did that was by eliminating the terror of getting out. So Jason Roy talks a lot about this. He got out very early. Or was it his first ball? Was it even or second ball? I remember it. He was at the Oval. He was caught a backward point. Terrible shot. Terrible shot. And there was absolutely no sense in Jason's mind that meant that he wasn't going to play the next game or he was going to face dreadful opprobrium. Now, obviously, there comes a point where if cricketers fail, and Zach Crawley would be a good example of this, the microscope obviously will remain on that player playing the same way, getting out the same way. Is he an opening batter? You can have all those conversations. But what seems to have happened with Morgan and Bayliss is something similar with McCullum and Stokes, which is a commitment from the captain. And captaincy on the field of play strikes me as being extremely slippery concept, very hard to find out what actual benefit it gives. But captaincy off the field of play in a sport where people spend so much time together, I think is really important. Is that the problem is that we don't really get to be party to it, which is why people then go in for psychobabble, because they then sort of speculate and invent and imagine what it might be, when it's possibly something quite simple, which is being comfortable in your environment. I mean, anybody who's ever worked anywhere.
Not pissing people off, you know.
Yes.
That must be like one of the more underrated, you know, qualities in a captain, you know, like not annoying people.
I think you're right. I think being somebody who's approachable and somebody you would want to speak to if you are having a bit of a problem, but also is going to be, you know, very lovely to you when you're enjoying yourself, because that's quite a nice thing to do. And you know, where I work, it's absolutely vital when you do broadcasting that you have to be comfortable. If you're uncomfortable on air, then the listener will hear it and the program will suffer. So it's essential that you create an atmosphere where people are comfortable, and basically that's what happens. You know, the broadcasters help themselves out. Cricketers don't necessarily help themselves out naturally, because they're playing in this very competitive environment where if you're a batter, you know, whether Geoffrey Boycott said this or not is open to question, isn't it? But isn't he supposed to have said to Derek Randall, I think it was Derek Randall said, I know which one's the googly. It might have been, no, it wouldn't have been Randall, because I think it was against Gleeson. It was against a sort of, you know, new leg spinner back in the early 70s. And Boycott said, yes, I've known for 2 weeks, but don't tell the others. Now I have no idea whether that's true, but it's told as a story to illustrate the point that, you know, these guys, they're teammates, but at the same time they're competitors. Because cricket is only about, if you're going to be a test cricketer, cricket is only about playing. If you're going to be a red ball cricketer, playing for England or India or whoever you represent, and only there do you get the money and the accolades and the love and the joy. So actually fostering a genuine team spirit is quite a skill, I think. You know,
and I think you know, Kohli actually did manage that. He is what he is. I think it's the same with Stokes. You know, he is what he is. I mean, he's not sort of going to, you know, suddenly, you know, become a suit just because he's the captain of England. You know, if you
you're right.
You know,
I see exactly what you mean.
In this test match in Headingley, for instance, I mean, you know, Kohli was the one guy. I mean, his misbehavior and his ability to aggravate people, it was one of the things which was moving things along. You know, I mean, it's not like the ball was doing anything.
No, it was actually essential.
I think it's entirely legitimate if it comes naturally, and then I think it's also received well. You know, whereas, you know, if you're like someone who's very staid and very, you know, if people know you, right? I mean, these guys are playing with each other and against each other for years, you know, And then one fine day you show up and you suddenly start acting all high and mighty, and it's going to annoy people. This is
and annoying people is a crucial part of it. I mean, that's often how people get their advantage in life.
That's the thing about psychobabble, which bothers me, because see, psychobabble completely dehumanizes the person. It sort of constructs this abstraction, of a very small set of relationships, between words, and there's no person at the bottom of it all. There's no you. It's like, this is why they get into this whole business of, oh, well, that was a really important spell and the really important half an hour which decided the test match. But what were they doing like the rest of the time? What? I mean, they were counting sheep or what? I mean, they're there all the time. It's this.
Yeah. But it is interesting though that and this speaks exactly to your point, that Stokes and Kohli have profound similarities and profound differences. So the most obviously profound similarity, I think, is that their charisma, and the charisma that they bring to their leadership is something that you do follow. I think there are leaders that you respect, and then there are leaders that you go, right, oh, well, this is what it's going to be now. Right. So we've got to follow that path. I'm either with that path or I'm against it. I want to be with it. If I'm with it, I'm all in it. Whereas other leaders are sort of like Len Hutton.
It helps them that they're like, really good players.
It does, but not all really good players have that. I mean, I contrast a bit with Joe Root's leadership, for example. Joe Root, I think, did a job, a very difficult job at the time. He was dealing with all the things we just talked about with COVID and whatnot. I think he's a hugely sympathetic captain who his teammates absolutely adored and loved and respected and all those things. But that's a bit different from being wildly charismatic and leading and showing what it is. Joe, you can't follow Joe Root's example because he's the best English batter that probably I've ever seen, and therefore may ever have existed, because cricket was not quite as difficult in the old days as it is now. So
he's quite a player, no? I mean, he's magnificent.
So he's quite a player. So, but you see, following that example is all well and good if you can, but it's quite difficult to do that. Whereas Stokes is a very good player, but he's a very flawed player. I mean, he gets out. He only averages about 35 with the bat. He averages about 35 with the ball. He has great spells of bowling. He has great moments with the bat. He drops a lot of catches. He catches a lot of catches. He's a very flawed player, but he has masses of charisma that drive his team.
And he tries everything. He reminds me more of, when I look at Ben Stokes, the player who comes to my mind every time immediately is Kapil Dev. And Kapil Dev is a player I barely ever watched. He was before my time. But everything I've read about Kapil Dev, the sort of the persona of Kapil Dev that's created, enormous natural talent, a great natural striker of the ball, a tireless bowler, of deceptive class, and just he was the guy in the Indian Test team of his day who could do everything on his day, and that is Ben Stokes.
Yes. I mean, I think Kapil Dev was a more skillful all-round bowler, but in terms of personality,
well, I mean, he had outswing. That's true.
Yeah, I mean, he was a beautiful bowler too. I watched a lot of Kapil Dev. I was a bit older than you, and he was beautiful to watch. He was rhythmic and graceful and lithe, and the ball. There was a whole theatre to how he did it, and the moustache was very helpful. And there was a lot happening. And then you knew that he could suddenly just smack 4 sixes to avoid a follow-on, that sort of thing.
But he also had that. Also had that vulnerability. It was always the quote-unquote irresponsible stroke or the irresponsible bowling change. It was just around the corner, at least for among the people who wrote about cricket at that time, through their eyes, it was always just around the corner. And of course, The Indian selectors back in the day were notoriously conservative bunch.
They're all
Yeah.
hindsighters. You see, this is the thing that I find so incredibly frustrating, is that I fell into the trap of it a little bit this time, the way Stokes was batting, because he was just coming down the wicket at Carl Jamieson. I couldn't see any cricketing sense in that, because Carl Jamieson's 6'8" and it wasn't really a pitch to do it all. So it was a very strange thing to watch his batting. So I think what he was doing was actually sort of trying to express something that he wanted the team to get. But with coupled there, all media are like this.
Yeah.
But the Indian media are possibly world champions at it, which is, it's a moment of brilliance if it works.
Yeah.
And it's terrible irresponsibility, and you shouldn't be doing that if you want to play for India, if it doesn't, which is extremely irritating for the players, because they make decisions in the moment and then they get sort of patronized by slightly corpulent journalists who are leading back going, well, he's let India down there, and that's not helpful.
Speaking of, I think Bazball, it sort of teetered on the edge twice in these 4 tests. Once when New Zealand had England 55 for 6, and that could very easily have been 60 for 8 on another day. And
Jamie Overton was plum LBW, and they didn't refer it, and it looked out at the time as well. So that was actually a howler. Yeah.
And then India had England 84 for 5, playing against 415 or whatever it was.
Yeah, they're out of the game.
That could have been 130 all out, given the length of England's tail. And in both of those cases, one more wicket at the wrong time would have maybe changed a lot of things for England. But I get the sense from Ben Stokes that he's not one to sort of make a U-turn, as it were. He's going to persist as long as he can persuade his players to persist.
He doesn't dwell. This was one of the things I wanted to say about the difference between him, say, and Kapil Dev, and almost anybody that you can think of, is that he's a very old school cricketer in one very specific way. So if you watch him with referrals, he has no real interest in them.
Yeah.
When a ball is bowled, if the umpire gives it out, he's happy. If the umpire gives it not out, he'll turn on his heel and go back. Yeah. He will not remonstrate. He never complains. To him, it is what it is. He's a very, very practical in the moment person. Now, it means that he has little cunning. So he tells his opponents exactly what he's going to do. He says, doesn't matter what they set, we'll chase it. Now, I was railing against this on commentary, saying, don't tell them that, because that will just encourage them to bat forever and set you 500, and you'll still go for it and get out. You need to offer them the cat,
He got the wonderful opportunity.
What do I know?
He got the wonderful opportunity at the end of the game to say, well, we made 380, and a part of me was really hoping they'd get to 450 just to see what we can do. You can just hear Virat Kohli steaming at that comment. It's like, this is what I need to hear right now after you pummeled me for 380.
We wanted to give you more runs. We tried. Look at what Broad bowled to Jasprit Bumrah, but you just kept on getting out. I know but it is fascinating to watch that, though, because I think that's a very instructive part of his persona. The fact that he can't really be bothered with DRS is that he can't really be bothered with complaining. He doesn't complain about what's happened in the match. You'll never see him argue about an umpire's decision or anything like that. It doesn't make him a better person or a worse person. The reason why it's interesting is because his brain is clearly wired in such a way as a ball is a moment, and then it's done. You get a decision, and off you go and do it again. And you just keep on going through that process over and over again. And if his process is that he's determined to attempt to win every game of cricket he ever plays, then this is what's going to happen. Occasionally they're going to, more than occasionally, perhaps very often, they're going to win dramatic games of cricket.
Yeah.
You would imagine the law of probabilities suggests that they're going to lose quite a lot of games cricket. And that is not very different from Owen Morgan and Bayliss's one-day team when they first started. They did score 350s, 400s, and get bowled out for 180, 200, you know.
And in Ben Stokes' defense, and even in Kohli's defense, because you see, this has echoes with Kohli's approach as well. You know, famously in at Adelaide in 2014 or whatever it was, he had the opportunity to shut the game down and hold on for a draw, and he still kept chasing this implausible target. It didn't come off, but he got two great centuries, and and then he went on to build an Indian side where first they played only 6 batsmen and 4 out and out bowlers. Then they played only 5 batsmen and an all rounder and 4 out and out bowlers. And then eventually now they're playing 4 batsmen and 2 all-rounders and a wicket-keeper and an out and out bowlers. And they're sort of designed, they're constructed to chase a result everywhere, every time.
I think this is absolutely true. So let me put a question to you that's occurred to me through this dialectic, actually. Do you think with Kohli and Stokes, the fact that they know that they're going to play 120, 130 test matches, hundreds of ODIs, hundreds of T20s, means that the game they play has got to be stimulating, And so what is the point in turning up and drawing the 112th game of test cricket you've played? If you're going to get any kind of fun out of this, you've got to really push the envelope. Now, that means dragging some less good cricketers along with you. Alex Lees is undeniably a less good cricketer than Ben Stokes. Zach Crawley is, Matthew Potts is, Jack Leach is. So you've got to drag them along and say, look, just do it. Just go out and do it. You'll have a whale of a time. If it comes off, you'll have a memory. If it doesn't, you'll have a memory of a loss, but so what? And if we didn't do this, you'd have a memory of a draw. And I wonder if when you've got so much of the pie, you've got such an enormous amount of history, that your motivation is that much greater to create more remarkable moments. He's got beat-heading. Kohli's got so many incredible moments. How do you keep on getting the thrill?
That's one way to put it. I think that's probably certainly true. I mean, it's at some point it must, although it's hard to imagine, it must be the case that at some point they get bored, and they want to win and they want to compete. But the other thing is also security. They're so confident in their ability, and they know how good they are, and they know how much work they put in, and by now it's sort of a well-oiled sort of machine. They put in so much work, and they maintain such and such level of fitness, and they practice in such and such way, and they know that they're going to be 5% better than the next guy, even on an average day. And so there's that security, and so then that sort of frees them up from any of these anxieties. The fear of failure is basically gone.
Okay, I've got another question for you, because let's put this into context, which we must, which is that England had won 1 in 17 games. So you've not got a lot to lose, have you?
But it's also a new guy, isn't it? I mean, it's also a new guy and a new coach.
It's a new,
Because
both
can
those
you imagine?
things
Can you imagine, for instance, this going pear-shaped for England? It's not Ben Stokes who would lose his job. I mean, I don't think it's even McCullum who would lose his job. It's Key who would lose his job, isn't it?
I guess so. But he's now bought himself years of this, because if you can do 4 out of 4, it doesn't matter if you lose the next 3 doing this, because they had so much fun at the beginning.
I mean, and even if even if McCullum goes pear-shaped, the next guy Rob Key recommends is going to be snapped up like that. You know, he's got credit in the bank now. So, you know, I mean,
yeah, all those things. I mean, it's a perfect storm, isn't it? I mean, essentially, you've got a new captain, you have a new coach, you come off the back of one loss in 17, you've got spongy balls, you've got flat pitches, you've got nothing to lose, you've got a charismatic captain who desperately just wants to have fun.
You got Jamieson missing a 1.5 test match out of 3.
Correct. Yeah.
That I think was a
massive. It was massive. Yeah. It was absolutely massive.
Burden lifted because with these test matches, one of the things you realize is that these batsmen are not going to let like a third or fourth bowler just bowl overs quietly. You know, I mean, unless the bowler is this was a thing that struck me in this Headingley test match. You know, it was how relentlessly attacking everything was. You know,
yes.
You know, we're
from both sides. From both sides.
Glenn McGrath, you know, used to find this short of a length, you know, where he's nowhere close to threatening the stumps. You know, but you know, he's going to bowl like 8 overs for 12 runs. You know, or 6 overs for 10 runs. You know, and you know, this is like the batsman's going to probably leave like, you know, 33 out of 36 balls or whatever. You know, that's never going to happen now, is it?
Except when Mitchell and Blundell were together, because Mitchell and Blundell did exactly that, and it was incredible to watch. I mean, they broke incredible. They would be Wisden Cricketers of the Year in any other year for what they achieved. They got the highest. There's a whole lot of partnership stats where they've blown everyone out of the water. Coming to England, 3 Test series, scores, runs, averages, etc. Most runs by a wicketkeeper.
That's another thing that actually I think is we underestimate competitively. It is that, you know, the turnover time from a new thing emerging on the field, it being studied and figured out by the opposition, and being sort of a counter argument being implemented. You know, you were talking before we started about how fast things move along, and even in Test cricket nowadays, even because tests are so scheduled, you know, so soon one after the other. I think that Test tactics are also, you know, to the extent that they exist, the cycles are sort of being accelerated. You know.
Well, I wonder about that. You see, because I do think that teams tend to play Test cricket according to the qualities of their personnel. And I guess the question that's open here and is interesting is, will they continue to do that in the face of very aggressive Test cricket? England are only using their qualities very, very well. They're using experienced new ball bowlers with a ball that doesn't last for very long. And they're using white ball cricketers in the lower and middle order to do that job against a ball on a pitch that's not particularly responsive. Mm-hmm. So they've got their tactics absolutely right. I thought New Zealand got their tactics absolutely right. They just didn't, in the horrible phrase, execute their plans.
But I think New Zealand got sort of their selections mixed up a little bit. They had the better left arm spinner in the series, and they didn't play him in that one Test match when Leach got 10 wickets.
It's unbelievable, isn't it? It's absolutely unbelievable. Jack Leach became, since 1950, I think, the only people to have taken 2 5-wicket hauls in England have been Murali, Warne, Underwood, Locke, and Laker. I mean, that is ridiculous. And Jack Leach is I respect him a lot as a cricketer. He's a very good cricketer, but for him to be in that place, and Ajaz Patel is sat on the bench having taken a 10 for. There was a lot of muddled thinking in New Zealand, and that's part again of the good fortune they had. The India Test was just more interesting because they were up against a side who, albeit with not a great deal of practice, were in a strong position in the game, were superior cricketers man for man. Jack Leach said to Ben Stokes, "We may not be the best team, but we'll be the bravest team." I have no idea what that means, Kartikeya, but he believes what that means. And that I think there is something to unpick there. Because it's true, if you put those two England 11s up against each other, England and India, there's no way, man for man, that is such a. Would you pick like the entire Indian pace? Probably not Shardul Thakur. You might like just weaken your tail a little bit to allow Jimmy Anderson in. But come on, you're not. Probably 7-4 in India's favour.
Ben Stokes and Ollie Pope, when they were batting, they looked actively like they were looking for balls to hit, and often trying to hit balls which are not there to be hit. Whereas with both Root and Bairstow, they were perfectly content to block for as long as required until they got something, on a length which was to their liking, so to speak. And then, as you said, in Root's case, he's also able to, move down the page from time to time to make a length, because he's so confident about, the ball not moving out the seam. But that I thought was an interesting distinction, which does suggest to me that there must be some sort of instruction that, go for it,
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, Ben.
I think
Folks,
so. I think, but
Ben Folks didn't.
Yeah.
Go for it.
No, Ben Folks played very traditional Test cricket, but it was absolutely the right thing to do because he had a tail that was ridiculously long. They were 5 down. They started that day at Lord's. I genuinely didn't expect them to win that game, and it was grey and overcast, and it was fourth day.
Yeah.
But the ball was that little bit older. I keep coming back to it. It's really important. It was, and folks knew that he wouldn't get out if he didn't have to. He played some quite attacking shots at various points. Some, because he effectively sort of denied Root 100, didn't at wherever it was next. I know that was Bairstow probably. But on that day, he was very, very contained. He was playing Test cricket in the sensible way. I don't know whether he just didn't get the memo or whether he thought winning the game would be more important because he's a fringe player. And I sort of come back to that a little bit because with Root and Bairstow, in your example, you've given me Pope and Stokes not quite timing it, not quite being in the zone. Well, Stokes has got a reason for it because he's the captain and he's decided that he's going to play this way, almost performatively. With Pope, he's been filled with this sort of MDMA hit of joyous love for all mankind and go out and express yourself and don't worry about being a number 3. Sorry about that, by the way, but we're not sorry because you should really enjoy it. It'll be great. I've never done it before. Don't think about that. Just go out and be number 3. And he, I think, has tried to look busy, be busy. He's not quite played the way that I recognise Ollie Pope play, even when he played that terrific 100. It was far from chanceless. It was quite skittish in places.
It was a little
and
frenetic.
I think that it was frenetic. It was frenetic. It was exactly that. It was frenetic, and I think that was a message to the management that we want to play like this. I can play like this, and then it came off. So he's got credit in the bank. And I love you, as you know, I love Ollie Pope as a batter because I see in him a Test match batter that I recognise. Someone like Ian Bell or whatever, or Mark Waugh, partly a little bit Damien Martin, all those sorts. I mean, he has that class, he has that time, he plays it very, very late. But I think those two played that way because of that. But at the same time, you're right to point out that Root and Bairstow seem to operate in a slightly different zone, and they operated in their own zones, didn't they? Because Root played his game without any hindrance, really.
Yeah.
And Bairstow played a game that we've not seen him play with a red ball before. He played it with a white ball. And so it started to make complete sense when he thought, oh, he's taken himself into a white ball zone.
Yeah.
And now he's playing like that. And then I was reminded of the times that he'd done that before. So I think that's what you're witnessing there.
I remember Bairstow coming to India last year, And I mean, granted, those were some pretty diabolical wickets, at least to start an innings. But I remember him sort of play a 3-ball innings in which he tried 3 sweeps.
Yes,
missed all of them. And that was not the Bairstow of this series. The Bairstow of this series would have
he's very still.
Yeah.
He's very still. He's
Yeah.
incredibly still, and he doesn't bat on off stump. He bats on around about middle and leg. It looks like down the wicket. So he's not doing the modern fad of going over.
Especially, I absolutely despise, especially those lefties who cover up. Like, I mean, at some point, Lees was batting on off stump and actually a little outside.
He batted outside off stump, and that stopped. And funnily enough, he got out in the first innings at Lords because I think he'd forgot that he'd moved. So he left a ball from Jameson because he kept moving across the crease to take a different guard. And I think he'd forgotten that he wasn't standing outside off at the moment. So he left it thinking, aha. Oh, no. But that was absolutely indicative of that timorous mindset that had been developing for all those months, a couple of years really in English cricket before then. But you're right. They're the enemies of cricket, standing outside off stump.
Because you just want like the ball to like smash into like the giant pad, I mean, this is so, but it doesn't always happen. I think look, I think India, especially if it's not seaming, I don't think there's a case for playing Thakur over Ashwin.
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, I was really surprised they didn't play Ashwin at Edgbaston.
Because Ashwin, in the face of this Bazball, you can be sure that Ashwin would have, raised a ruckus.
Yeah.
I mean, he would have gone to war,
Yeah, he's a thinking man, and he would just not have allowed this nonsense to proceed the way that it has done. But I've never understood why India haven't recognised that they've got two all-rounders. One of them is a much better batter than the other one, but they're both all-rounders.
Yeah.
And they both take lots of wickets. And when they can't take wickets because the pitches aren't being conducive to them quickly, they take their wickets slowly at the cost of not very many runs. So why on earth wouldn't you use them when your other potent weapons, Bumrah and Shami, could really do with a break every now and then?
I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. Because the going theory is that if you have a second change fast bowler, then that creates a bridge to Shami and Bumrah's second spell, and it gives you a full session of sustained pressure. And when the ball is seaming, there is something to be said for that. But when the ball isn't seaming, when it's a good pitch, then you need something. You need to be either quick or you need something.
The only bowler that posed a question after the ball was 40 overs old at Birmingham, at Edgbaston, was Jadeja. The question was a pretty futile question, really, which was, what are you going to do if I just spin it out the footmarks outside your leg stump?
Yeah.
Because a batter can decide to do nothing. But at least he asked the question of the Bazballers, are you going to go for it? Bairstow didn't. I don't know if you noticed, but he just padded them all away. He said, okay, but you're going to bowl Shardul Tucker at the other end, and I'm going to hit him for 7 and over. So you still won't get your new ball, even if I pad away every ball that you bowl.
Yeah. But you also saw exactly what you're saying, which is that, Jadeja gives you 2 or 3 and over, but that's only effective if something's happening at the other end. He's a foil. He's not.
But if Ashwin's bowling, but the thing about Ashwin is that if they had tried to come at Ashwin, they might have succeeded. It was a good pitch. The ball there wasn't a lot of turn in it. Ashwin would have been asked questions as well, but he would have asked more complicated questions of any of those batters than Shardul Tucker.
I think Ashwin on a good day, on a, like that fourth or fifth day, heading Edgbaston wicket, I think Ashwin would have gotten something like, 4 for 100 in 22 or 23 overs, and
Yeah,
that would have been a good return.
it
But
might have won the game.
I think he would have chased the 4 for 100 instead of settling for the not for 65.
Correct. Yeah.
Because
Correct.
the art of getting 4 for 100 is that even if you run into a Bairstow and a Stokes, or a Bairstow and a Root, and you get hammered for say 80 in 15 overs, one if you get one of them, right, then you can get easier batters to
Yeah.
bowl at, and that's
Oh
how
God,
you
yeah.
4 for 100.
Well, you
But
get
you have
Jack
to
Leach and you get Jimmy Anderson and you get
yeah,
Matt Potts and you get Stuart
and
Broad. You get three left-handers in the bottom three.
and you have but you have to keep attacking to try and break the stand, and that's what Jasprit Bumrah and Mohammad Shami did, and it didn't come
Yeah.
off for them. But I mean, they had no choice because there's no other attacking bowler. It's just the two of them basically who were doing the plausible attacking bowling.
Yeah, I mean, Siraj has the capacity to do that, but his lines were really poor. It was way too leg sided. He got way too straight on occasion.
Yeah.
And that was never going to work. I mean, and that could be Siraj's natural action, actually, when you watch him. So it makes you think that that's going to happen.
And they always give him both a mid wicket and a square leg.
Which is a fairly good giveaway, isn't it?
They want him to bowl there,
Yeah, I know, but I'm not sure that it was a particularly effective ploy.
No, not
on that occasion.
Not on an even-paced wicket. If the wicket is a little slow, that works. But this is not slow.
But also, I think everybody was always going to struggle. If you look at bowling analyses across the board, really, there are very few that come out. And Potts was a surprise. Anderson, across the 4 tests, was not a surprise, but he bowled the way he always bowls, and he's very adaptable. So if he's got a shit ball and shit conditions, he'll find a way of not going for very many runs. He's sort of like the Jadeja of seam bowlers, really.
Yeah.
Once the ball is 40 overs old, that spell that he'll bowl there will go for very little. And then he's done his job, and then he waits for a new ball.
Yeah.
But most bowlers struggle. I mean, Broad struggled. Bolt was hit. Southey was hit at various different points. Southey was mercilessly. Shami got hit. Yeah, they were very, very difficult conditions for bowlers to bowl in. They did not resemble English pitches of even 3 or 4 years ago. Really,
it was a test match of halves, isn't it? In many ways, there were spells in which Bolt and Shami were absolutely unplayable, and then there were spells in which they were basically fodder.
Yeah, because the thing that they're using to bowl with is perfectly serviceable until it falls apart. So if your seam is stitched too thinly, or just not tightly enough, then what happens is that the ball absorbs just the moisture going across grass and just being opened up. Stuff gets in, and that makes it softer. And that's effectively what's happened time and time again. It won't happen in Australia, but the Kookaburra ball does different things. It won't happen in India. I mean, if you play on the pitches that England played in after Chennai in the last tour, then it'll be fascinating to see how that approach manifests itself. There'll be that approach will manifest itself, but I'm not quite sure what it'll look like. It probably won't be any less effective, actually, than the one that they employed last time.
No, but I think it will be. Look, I am not entirely, down on Bazball. I mean, it may be a terrible name, but it is.
Yeah.
There is a certain logic to the idea. Basically the logic of Bazball is that a risk in Test cricket, right? The risk taking in Test cricket for batsmen when they are playing a scoring shot is, overestimated in conventional Test cricket. That's basically the premise of Bazball. He's saying,
Yeah.
well, people are the risk is not as severe as people say it is, and there's an inefficiency which we can exploit, and we've got the players to do it. Now if you have a lineup which is like three Pujaras, then you haven't got the players to do it. But you have Bairstow and Root, and who knows, Butler in the future. I don't know.
You're absolutely right. If you say to Johnny Bairstow,
Yeah.
how do you fancy facing a 30-over-old Kookaburra ball, white ball, with two slips and a gully, an extra cover, a mid-off, a long leg, maybe a deep backward square leg and a mid-on?
Yeah.
And he's thinking, well, you've only got two men out.
Yeah.
So anything that's outside the off stump, I can just lift over the infield and I'll get four for it. Yeah. Fantastic. And so if they bowl short, I've got long leg. I've got to find out where long leg is, the deep backward square leg. Okay, so I've got the rest of the field to play with. Yeah, you got all that. Yeah. How do you feel about that? Obviously, that is a pretty smart thing to say to someone like Johnny Bairstow, I would think. And I wouldn't be surprised if that exactly has been said. You're basically batting in the power play constantly.
Yeah. And especially if you're then sort of able to put aside the fact that occasionally, a Jasprit Bumrah or a Trent Bolt is going to bowl you an over where you won't lay bat and ball for like 4 out of 6 balls.
Yeah.
And as long as you're still there at the end of it, hey, it's still on.
Yeah, I think that's basically it. I think you've actually summed up Bazball there. Our work is done, Kartikeya. We've done it.
It's such a strange thing. They tried for hours and hours and hours to get a wicket at Edgbaston, and they couldn't get it. And the other day, they got 9 wickets between them in 15 overs. The same players.
I know. It's preposterous, isn't it? Really, and that's the joy of watching what we watch. I guess the key is to remember.
That, the bowlers are going, "Wow, he didn't miss." I have a theory about Kohli. I think he's getting to a point in his career where he should actually consider doing what Ponting never contemplated, which is to move down to 6.
Oh, wow. 6, not 5.
No, 5 is punt, mainly because for the foreseeable future, every other prospect in India for a test batting spot is a right-hander.
Fair enough. Okay.
Punt is the only plausible left-hander.
No, that's a perfectly good theory. Okay, so Kohli at 6, I think that's a terrific idea. He could Steve Waugh for 5 or 6 years. The Kohli route average conversation on Twitter is one of the most seriously innovating and tedious ones that there is. Yet at the same time, it's marvelous. So nationalist England fans wind up Indians by pointing out that Root's average is now higher than Kohli. Nationalist Indian fans wind up Root fans and England fans by pointing out that India is the greatest country in the world, populated by more people, who knows more about cricket, has more money than them. And it's an extremely tedious argument that goes on over and over again. But England fans have just got delighted that Root's gone over 50 and Kohli's gone under 50, which is...
Well,
I like numbers. I like numbers. But when you like numbers to the point when it clouds your judgment of just 2 great players being utterly brilliant around about the same time, the Kohli conundrum is a weird one because it's been going on for so long, and the record makes it quite tricky not to think that something has happened to Kohli in the last couple of years. But it won't be one single thing. It'll be a whole variety of different things that would have caused the issue.
I have a theory about Kohli, which I want to tell you about, and I want to see what you say about it. You see, I think Kohli is very much like Ponting in that he's this very assertive player around his off stump, and he
Pugnacious. Yes.
wants to get forward, and he wants to meet the
Yep.
ball, and he wants, apart from giving offering some courtesy to a very, very small line and length range, he wants to be in a position to smash everything else, basically. He wants to hit
Yes.
everything. And I think that this happened to Ponting, and this is also happening to Kohli, is that as they both got older, their reflexes are not what they were in their 30s, what they were in their 20s. And
Ooh.
that little thing messes with their balance, it messes with the way they meet the ball, it messes with their judgment. And, because you see the same patterns with Kohli that you saw with Ponting towards the last 3 or 4 years of his career. Joe Root, in contrast, has precisely that ability to wait on the ball and play it late. And so he's got in a sense, he's got a better back foot game than both of them.
I was going to say exactly that, and it's fascinating. So I think Kane Williamson, if he can get over whatever his injury is, will be another one who would continue until later. Because I've said on commentary many times that Kohli's front foot press forward, and it's always like in the first 10 balls of his innings.
Yeah.
Just like Ponting, if you look at the Ponting Flintoff over that everyone raves about in 2005, you basically see how Kohli addresses the ball when he walks out to the wicket. Yeah. Because what people don't truly appreciate is that every single cricketer walks out when they first begin their innings knowing full well that this is dangerous. I mean, every team talks about it. First 20 balls that you've got at somebody. So they know that every team is thinking exactly the same thing. So when they go out to bat, they go out a certain way. Viv Richards was fascinating because out to bat was quite deliberately to be swaggering and own the space. But he told me that he really didn't trust himself. He didn't really know if he was going to succeed or not. But he chose a certain way of approaching. Ponting and Kohli come out and they do this sort of ownership thing, and then they come at the bowler, whoever it is, with their front pad. They're absolutely thrust. And it's fascinating, isn't it? Because you're dead right. When they're in there, when their reflexes are at their absolutely most perfect, they can cope with a bowler who knows that they're going to do that. But as they get a bit older, probably just got a little bit less time to access the ball. Whereas Root, Williamson, they're really obviously opposite it. Pujara plays the ball late. Alistair Cook plays the ball pretty late, actually. People like that have got the opportunity to just keep on going until later, I think, because essentially you're giving yourself an extra yard and a half to access the ball as you get older. I mean, isn't that just basically the scientific fact of it? And if you're facing Bumrah, who's bowling the ball a yard in front of you, a yard further forward than everyone else, then that is an issue.
I think the way out of that for Kohli and also for Ponting would be to basically, move down the order.
Yeah, I think you're dead right. I think that's exactly what they've got to do.
I mean, India need that. And actually, come to think of it, Australia needed that as well. Because I think at that point in their careers, I think Michael Hussey and Ricky Ponting would have benefited from swapping spaces, and they didn't. And
this is a profound thought. I mean, there's a reason why Steve Waugh's got an average in excess of 50. It's because he never even bothered to go up to number 3. He realised there's quite a good idea to stay at 6.
I mean,
forever.
Kohli, for instance, I think would be happier against the older ball. I think he would be happier batting against the tail. It would be better for the other players in the Indian side to bat at 3 and 4 now instead of Kohli. I mean, I think Pujara still bats at 3 while he plays, but 4 is definitely open and should be open now.
Is there any sense that that's a kind of emasculating manoeuvre for somebody so important as Kohli?
that he goes down to number 6? Would that hinder doing the right thing, do you think?
Well, perhaps, but I think Kohli is probably too smart to let that stand in the way.
Yeah.
What's far more likely is that Iyer and all these people are not really looking like test number 4s yet.
Yes, but you don't find a good number 4 until you actually put them there.
We've sort of been through a tour of Bazball and all sorts of ancillary topics. It's been a lot of fun. I don't know where Bazball will lead. I think, as with all other things, it will fall to earth. But what will be fascinating to see is how it falls to earth. And I very much doubt that it will crash too obviously. But I think it will definitely. So there's a reversion to some mean, which is less, eccentric than England chasing a 6 and over every Test match.
I can't tell you how much fun I've had talking to you tonight. And you pretty much summed it up absolutely perfectly. It is eccentric. It is ridiculous. It's like a sort of P.G. Wodehouse novel, but with very different characters.
Yeah.
Yet somehow all of them strangely motivated by the same sort of crazed self-belief that P.G. Wodehouse characters always have. And so in that sense, I see Bazball as taking us back to basically the early 1920s.
Yeah, it's interesting you call it self-belief, because I've always thought of it as, certainty. There's this complete absence of doubt about, possible adverse outcomes.
I think that's pretty more accurate. I think you're right. I think that's pretty more accurate. Many of us have self-belief, but we don't have what Jack Leach called bravery, what others may call courage, and what I witnessed as a rash lunacy. But I still go back to the point. I just don't think I know what's going on, but I'm thoroughly enjoying watching it and making sense of it and seeing a whole new way that cricketers can think about playing Test cricket. It may last for 2 or 3 years. It may last for 18 months or 6 months, but we'll never forget it. We'll never forget the time that England preposterously chased down 270 plus 4 times running in games that followed very similar patterns. Lords maybe slightly differently, and we eventually just came to think of that as normal when it was completely abnormal. But 2022, I was there. It was fun.
Perhaps that's why sort of the word that sort of the terminology is so apposite, because none of the existing words and ideas that we have seem to fit it exactly. So perhaps we should embrace the phrase, Bazball. Yeah.
Hey, look, we've got to describe it one way or the other, haven't we? It's typical of the man that he refuses to allow us to call it that. Maybe we need to, when you put this podcast out, just find a term, ask people to find a term that Brendan McCullum will be happy with. Yeah. But it's got to be no more than two or three syllables tops. 2 really is ideal.
Yeah, that would be a nice side project. But anyway, Daniel, this has been fun. We should definitely keep monitoring the progress of Bazball and come back for another conversation sometime soon. This has been great fun.
Let's do it straight after the South Africa series, and let's see what we say then.
Sounds good.
Cool.
Cheers.